Hello and welcome to Monday's Cross Question. It's 2 minutes past 8 here on LBC. Let me introduce my panel. To my left is Harriet Cross, Conservative Shadow Home Office Minister and MP for Gordon and Buchan. She was elected first last year. Next to her is Jim Murphy, former leader of the Scottish Labour Party and also a former Scotland Secretary. If you're watching on Global Player, you'll definitely recognise him. But you've kind of been out of the limelight
10
for a
short
bit, haven't
years.
you? Is it 10 years?
Short years.
Really? Goodness me.
Lucky me.
To my right, also out of the limelight since she stopped being leader of the Greens, but very welcome guest back with us is Baroness Natalie Bennett, Green Party peer, former leader. And next to her is Whelan, columnist for the Daily Telegraph. Lots to talk about today. Lots of your calls already coming in. 0345 6060 973. And of course, you can watch us on Global Player and the LBC app.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's go to our first caller. It's Chris in Nottingham. Chris, very good evening.
Hello.
What's your question?
Yeah, basically, earlier on when you had the guy from the military talking about we have to sell it better and stuff, I take issue with that because I think that you really don't, do you think young people are stupid? Because I don't know. I can't understand why anyone will join the army. At the moment, you've made it impossible for young people to get on the housing ladder. You've made it almost impossible to get a doctor's appointment. Instead of taxing social media companies, you've taken it out on people that are disabled and can't work and the elderly. And then, to top it off, if you do go overseas and fight for your country and you shoot a Taliban member, and then you go to jail for 7 years after serving. And if that doesn't happen to you, the best case is you probably live in destitution and on the street. And so I think that it's not about selling it better. It's that people aren't that stupid anymore. I mean, the young people in this country have never got less. And why? Okay. And then somebody in a nice suit.
What's your question, Chris?
My question is, why would anybody want to join the army, basically?
Okay. Right. Well, let's put that to our panel. Jim Murphy.
Why would anyone want to join the Army, the Royal Navy or the Royal Air Force? Yep. Look, I've never served, so I'm not sure if anyone in the panel has. But the members of the armed forces that I meet are motivated by a desire to improve themselves and protect their country. Sometimes, of course, it's because they can't find work in other fields, but in the main, it's because they have in effect a calling, a commitment, a sense of vocation. Often it will run in the family. And I'm hoping today, and I'm assuming Chris's phone calls relating to this, I'm hoping today in the Defence Review it makes it a little more attractive to join any branch of His Majesty's Armed Forces, particularly what they've announced today on housing. Because Chris, I don't agree with everything that Chris has said, but the point about how do we care for those who are in service is a really important one. So a big announcement today on improving armed forces housing, and I think that will make it in some way more attractive, as will the above inflation pay increases. But you can pay people any amount of money and you can make the housing as attractive as you like. Ultimately, people still have to want to serve because it's the most dangerous job that we ask anyone to do.
Harriet.
Yeah, I should probably first say you gave me a slight promotion. I'm not a Shadow Home Office Minister. I'm a whip to the Home Office. But I mean, that was very, very kind of you. I will gladly feed that back into the powers that be.
Producers will be shot later.
No, don't do that. Why would anyone want to join the armed forces? I think it's quite a sad question, actually. I think we as a country and people within this country should be awfully proud of the country that we are and the want to serve, the purpose of wanting to serve, and actually showing the patriotism to actually want to stand up for our country in every aspect of our country, whether that's the people, the place, the traditions, our character, is something that we should all be pushing towards as much as we possibly can, and something that we should always be sort of promoting and pushing forward. One thing I think Chris is right on is talking about sort of coming home and sort of any sort of concerns with actions on the battlefield following you home. And we have seen recently with the the Northern Ireland Legacy Act being repealed and things like that. And that is concerning. And that is the sort of thing which will drive people away from wanting to join the armed forces if they think that sort of actions that happen in the face of war, in the heat of battle, can follow them for the rest of their lives. And that is concerning. But no matter what job you have, whether that is entering the armed forces, entering teaching, entering medical services, people have a calling and people want to serve and people want to make the country a better place in whatever way they choose to do that. Some do that through the armed forces. I certainly I actually tried to join the armed forces. I tried to join the army when I was young. I couldn't get in because I didn't pass the medical. I think actually there are some places or some areas within the armed forces, such as the medical conditions, where they are probably a bit too stringent, and actually you lose a lot of potential recruits to the forces because of that. But I think the idea of people not wanting to join is doing down a huge reason why our country is as great as it is, and actually the patriotism that we show. And we saw that, for example, during COVID, people getting together and actually standing up for each other, standing up for the country. And I think that's something that we should celebrate and always push towards increasing this year, next year, and for every year down the line.
I have an explanation for your promotion. Apparently that's how you were described on BBC Parliament this afternoon. Can't trust the BBC on anything, can you? Honestly.
Nightmare.
Ella Whelan.
I think it's a great question because a lot of the discussion today has been about how this is going to be funded, what kind of machinery is going to be used, and the existential question about whether or not you're going to convince a new generation to actually, whether it's fly the drones or go out in the boots and do the work of being war ready, hasn't been covered. And the reason why we can't answer the question of why should young people join the armed forces is because I think we don't know what it is we do stand for as a country. I mean, there's a very nice speech that you just gave mentioning COVID and how great a country we are. I wouldn't want to disagree with it, but in order to feel like a great country, you have to know what you are about, what you stand for. And I don't think we do. We don't have a coherent identity. I'd like to say that it was, what does it mean to be from this country? It means I'd like to say it means believing in tolerance, freedom, democracy. But you look at what's happening. I mean, elsewhere in the news today, someone's been convicted and fined for burning a Quran. So blasphemy laws exist in this country. So we're
Which
a
we'll
mess.
be talking about after 9.
Well, great, but we're a mess, and no politician from any party has the guts to ask that question, which is, what do we stand for? And so if you're asking young people to risk their lives for a sense of a nation that they're meant to be patriotic about, or that they're meant to serve, you have to have the answer for what it is they're serving for. And it's at the moment it comes down to sort of COVID, how nice we were to each other in COVID. We weren't nice to each other in COVID. COVID was a really bleak time in which the state sold out its citizens.
I think the point I was making there is that it shows that actually when we need to, people come together. So communities looked after each other, people looked after the elderly, they looked after their neighbours. When we need to pull ourselves together and actually show that we do have more than just a selfish gene in our bodies, we can do it as a country. And that is something that we need to make sure that we are feeding, promoting and making sure that we're working towards, and whether that is through actually stronger ways in which we can recruit into the armed forces, making sure that retention is better, showing that it is actually a really valued career with lots of different opportunities within it. There is something in all of us which is innately there, but actually means that we will be altruistic and we will serve our country if we need to and when we need to.
That sounds great, but it's not. It sounds like you're talking about the NHS rather than people who are potentially going to war. I mean, if you're asking people to go to war, there has to be some belief in the political motivation behind that war readiness. You look back at previous wars, there was always a sense of the political element of it, of people believing in the mission of what the war was being fought for. And, whether it's the threat of Russia or, we can keep talking about ourselves as a democratic nation and how important it is and how proud we are of it. But when you look at the sort of day-to-day facts of what's happening in British politics, whether it's the years of Brexit, whether it's, minor things like the row going on with Sir Lindsay Hoyle at the moment and the Speaker and how the Labour Party's handled this announcement, democracy is a word that most politicians wouldn't know about if you hit them over the head with it. So my point is, it's just
Let's go to a member of the
House of Lords.
different scale.
Natalie.
Well, I don't think anyone's really addressed the sort of underlying point in Chris's question, which is young people feeling like they have not been treated well in society, with massive levels of child poverty, where food banks, hygiene poverty are a huge issue, where schools are failing so many people. People are being pushed out of schools, pupils are being pushed out of schools. And I think Chris was getting at, first of all, the point of, if young people don't feel like Britain's given them a good life, then, why should they want to serve? I think that was the underlying point, and I think he has a very powerful point. But couldn't
he have made that point in the 1930s as well?
Yeah,
when unemployment
every
was,
generation.
I mean, it's not unique to our times now, is it?
Well, I think what's different about these times is there is a massive amount of wealth in our society. I mean, the 1930s were a time of economic collapse. We're now in a society where people can see a few people making huge amounts of money, and so many people, so many whole communities, abandoned communities in the north, being left just without the investment, without the government support. The focus down on London and the southeast, and that leaves people very disillusioned. And the practical reality, of course, is that lots of people who do go in to serve are actually recruited from those communities because, as Jim said, they don't have any other choice available to them. And we recruit, as no other country in Europe does, 16 and 17-year-olds, and that's something that I've long been working against. I've just been working on the Armed Forces Commissioner Bill in the House of Lords, where we've acknowledged that we haven't protected people, particularly women serving in the military, nearly well enough. And so we've gone from the Ombudsman to the Armed Forces Commissioner to try and protect people better who are serving there. But we can't forget the point that I was at a military briefing only a couple of months ago. We were still losing 300 people more a month than we were actually recruiting. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to agree with Jim about the housing point. Took part in the Armed Forces parliamentary scheme, so I was embedded with the RAF a couple of years ago, and I saw some terrible housing. And that's something that we're recruiting people from the poorest communities. We're not treating them properly in terms of military culture, and they're in terrible housing.
Elaine's got a comment here. She says all MPs should do some voluntary armed service before being elected. Do as I say, not as I do. Well, there are, I think, compared to when you were in the House of Commons, Jim, there are far more MPs with some sort of military background in today's House of Commons than there were 10, 20 years ago.
I think there are now more MPs, newly elected MPs in Parliament, who with an armed forces background than in any election in the last 5 decades. And I think that's a good thing. I think Parliament needs to have butchers, bakers, candlestick makers and members of the ex-members of the armed forces.
That's what we need, more candlestick makers.
And butchers and bakers. But I think, it was Elaine that texted in, there are such schemes. I did the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme with the Royal Navy. I also did the Parliamentary Police Scheme. It's not a huge amount. It's 30 days over a year, but at least it gives you some insight. But it's a very light touch replacement for the genuine service that these people who have brought a career of the armed forces into Parliament.
Well, it's just, this is what you can't do it like you do a few days at a bake sale. It's not something that you sort of volunteer in this sort of altruistic way. I mean, the whole point of serving is you're making a political decision to defend your country and potentially kill other people at the behest of the leaders of your country. I mean, that's an inherently political decision. I hate it that the government said it's going to work with the Department for Education get 30% more cadets by 2030. And all the adverts you see for recruitment are all selling this to young people as ways to get fit or ways to be interested in technology. And it's avoiding the real issue is when are you going to sit down with this young person and say, right, I'm potentially going to ask you to push this button or pull this trigger and someone might die, and when they ask you why, you should have a good answer. And the fact is we don't have the answer, which is a strong defence of what it means to be British, what it means to live in this country, why we're better than the people we're fighting, whatever it is. And the Labour Party the government hasn't managed anywhere in this review or an announcement got to the heart of the matter, which is you can spend all the money you like, but you're not going to get anyone sign up for it unless you make the convincing political argument for why we need to be war ready.
Right, we will move on in just a moment with our panel. It's 17 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
£100 and over.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
18 minutes past 8 on LBC. Jim Murphy is here, former leader of the Scottish Labour Party and former Scotland Secretary and founder of Arden Strategies. What is that?
We're an advisory company that helps candidates in elections all over the world who are trying to win their elections.
You're the Linton Crosby of the Labour Party, then.
Well, perhaps I like Linton as a person. I should say that first of all.
That's what he does on the other side.
I like Linton as a person, but we're in different places in the political camp.
Yeah.
We campaign for, we work with candidates that I would vote for and that I can justify to my mother. Which is the second test. And then we also advise corporates in the UK about politics and media engagement. And again, same rule, people I like and things that I can justify to my mum. And that's
your mum must be a busy woman.
Yeah. And she's got more than one son, so it keeps her even busier.
Harriet Cross is a newly elected MP. She's already a Conservative whip. She's MP for Gordon and Buchan. How have you found your first 11 months?
I was saying to Jim, I can't believe it's been 11 months. It hits you very quickly, and you do have to be prepared for just not being prepared. But I think it is good for you because you learn very quickly. And I always say this: you learn very quickly. Sort of, there's a load of balls coming towards you. Which ones you need to grab onto, which ones you need to duck, and which ones you just need to kind of keep a watching brief on. And I feel like I've become better at that over the last few months. But I mean, there's been certainly not my way. I mean, in my neck of the woods, Aberdeenshire, sort of energy, oil and gas, farming and fishing are the key things. And it seems like we've been having a lot of, I don't want to say arguments, but robust discussions about each of those over the last 11 months. So it's definitely kept me busy. There's definitely a lot going on out there, but no, I wouldn't change a thing. I've loved my 11 months. Can't wait for the next 4, hopefully more years as well.
Right, Baroness Natalie Bennett is with us, Green Party peer, former leader, and Ella Whelan, columnist for the Daily Telegraph. Right, Khaled is in Wimbledon. Khaled, hi, what would you like to ask?
Good evening, Ian. Good evening, panel. My question is very straightforward. The Ministry of Defence has a history of incompetence, mismanagement, inefficiency and waste. And therefore, given today's announcement that we need a strategic defence review, we need massive upscaling of our defence industries, etc., etc., can we deliver, or will this be the mother of all, is this going to be just a waste of time and money?
Natalie.
I think that's a really good question, Khaled, and you're absolutely right about the track record. And I think we've also got to ask broader questions. There's really got to be careful thought given about what we invest in, and that has to not come from lobbying from a handful of major arms companies. There has to be a real strategic decision-making here, and it's something where we need to look at cooperatively, particularly with our European allies, and also be extremely...
And American.
And being extremely realistic about the current political situation of America. And we don't know what Trump's America is going to do next. There's no obvious sign of an alternative on the agenda. So we've really got to think very hard about how we're tied with America. I mean, one of the things that when I did the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme, there's a plane called the Rivet Joint, which is a surveillance plane. And we have a handful of them, and America has a lot, and they go to America every year to have to be serviced. Now, is that a viable long-term situation with Trump's America? I would say that it isn't. I was outside a military base between Peterborough and Norwich, which is entirely run by the US military. Those are Trump's men and women who are flying over British soil. We've got no control over them. There's big questions we've got to ask about that relationship with the UK military. I brought the paper along, the Strategic Defence Review along, because I'm picking up Ella's point about democracy. At 5 o'clock, I went to the paper office and said, can I get a copy of this? And they said, oh, no, you can't get it yet. This is the thing that the country has been debating, the media has been debating since the end of last week. So we've got real problems with our democracy.
And journalists had it hours before MPs and peers.
And industry, apparently. And industry as well, apparently.
They had it at 8 o'clock in the morning, yeah.
You're very much picking up my point about who's making the decisions here. Is it democratic decision-making made with careful consideration of the strategic best interests of Britain, or where does the power lie in this decision making? And I think there's some real problems in that.
Ella?
Well, I agree with Natalie on that, but the thing I wanted to pick up on from Khaled's question is it's back to my point about the way in which the narrative is framed around this announcement, because one of the things that the government has tried to make a big deal out of is what the defence spending will do for the economy at large, and that it will produce all these jobs and it will be so great and innovation will be wonderful. And you look at, like, the BBC has among others, has broken down the numbers and shown that, essentially if you're just shifting manufacturing around, or you're doing a little bit here in defence instead of doing it somewhere else, then actually the results aren't as gleaming as the government is trying to make out. And it's not to sort of pick holes in it about that, but just to say, again, why not make the argument that we need to spend this money, we need to, particularly, the things I'd be interested in is around innovation. Actually, Marc Francois, one of the few interesting things he said on the programme was about the need for long-term investment.
Sorry for being such a terrible interview.
No, I just, he does go on. But the need for it, long-term innovation. So not just suddenly, just not this, and not the kind of Labour view of long-term, which is we won't do anything yet in case anything goes wrong. Sort of really, really overly cautious, careful, obsessed with sound money spending, all the rest of it. But the sort of visionary long-term planning, which actually might do something for the economy. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is saving the country, isn't it? It's just kind of confusing, when if particularly to come back to talking to young people, you say, we've got all these plans, we're going to spend all this money. It's because it's for the economy, It's because they'll create a few new jobs somewhere in a place that's been long neglected, not because we need it, because the world is ending. So that you're kind of playing the two narratives at the same time. If you listen to government ministers today, it sounds like the world is ending, and then on the other hand they're like, oh no, it's just for jobs.
Harriet.
I think Khaled's question was on delivery, and I think when we look at this defence review as a whole, we will not be able to deliver this defence review unless we increase spending to 3% of GPDR, because that is what
GDP.
What did I say?
GDPR.
We could try. I don't know how to even look. GDP, 3% of GDP, because that is how the people who put the review together, that is the assumptions that they made. So without that, we will not be able to deliver the building, the increased capacity, any sort of innovation into things like AI or new warfare, for example, drones, protecting undersea infrastructure. None of this will be possible unless we have that commitment to increase to 3%. We saw at the end of last year the Defence Secretary saying that, yes, we're going to get 3% by 2034. Within a few days, that was then reduced to an ambition. So that is completely different. And what the MOD need, what the military need, in order to deliver anything on this plan, is foresight and able to plan their budgets properly. If they don't know when the money's going to be coming, or if it's going to be coming, or what stages it's going to be coming in, they will not be able to plan. They will not be able to get the foresight or the path towards delivery, and therefore, no matter how good, bad or indifferent the details of this plan are, and that's for everyone to make up their own mind, it will not be delivered.
Okay. Jim?
I think the part that's missing is the conversation with the public. Khaled phoned in about waste, but there's other issues. I think if we're in a country now that has to be war ready, we need to have a war ready conversation, and no document's going to do that in itself. We need an adult, continuous, open conversation about what that means for the economy and our way of life. Now, on the specifics, just quickly, Russia's producing 2,000 ammunition shells every hour. They're producing a battle tank every hour. And so it is important that the UK builds these 6 new munitions factories. I don't know where they'll be, but they'll probably be in the parts of the UK where very few politicians ever grew up. And there'll be real jobs in real working class communities with a real sense of pride. And we should celebrate that. On the geopolitics of it, I also think there's dishonesty is too strong. Not enough openness about what the government's trying to achieve. Well, obviously I wouldn't have voted for Donald Trump, but he's the president. And actually, if a Labour government achieves nothing else over the next 5 years, I think it will, but if it achieves nothing else over the next 5 years, then keeping Donald Trump attached to Article 5, the Mutual Defence Pact that underpins NATO, then that will be an achievement of genuinely historic proportions. Because if Trump, in an early morning social media post, or in a White House press conference where he sets another world leader up to be humiliated. If he reneges on Article 5, I wouldn't want to be living in Lithuania, Estonia or Latvia,
No, quite.
all of whom we have a treaty obligation to defend. And so this thing about America, unreliable, etc., of course it's difficult, it's unpredictable, and all the orthodoxy that many of us have grown up under, understanding has just been the rules of the game, have changed. But that's why Keir's been absolutely willing to forgo all sense of sort of hubris or anything else to just try and get alongside Trump, and that will continue, and it has to continue whether we like it or not.
Let's just add another question into this before we go to the news from Danny in South Norwood. Why are we spending so much money on all these nuclear submarines rather than kit which we can actually use to fight with? Now, these 12 nuclear submarines will be nuclear powered, but will not carry nuclear weapons. 30 seconds from each of you. Jim.
I don't think it's an either or. If you get to 2.5% by 2027 and get to 3% relatively soon after, you can have these nuclear powered subs, and you can have fighting kit and the drones and
They're
the
going to
housing.
cost £1.5 to £2 billion each.
They are, but we've signed up a treaty. We're over our 30 seconds already, but we've signed up into a treaty with Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States as part of the South China Sea. It's an AUKUS deal. People can Google it, or other search engines are available. But one of the other things that's in the thing today, in the document today, is that we'll probably do a little less in the South China Sea, and we'll do what's called more in the high north, the Arctic Circle, which is physically much closer to us, and where both Russia and China pose a threat.
We need defence in all areas. We need it on the land, we need it in the sea, and increasingly we're needing it in space. In terms of the sea, in terms of submarines, they are a hugely important part of our capability. More and more warfare is being done under the sea in terms of the attacks on infrastructure, the attacks on cables, in order to go around undetected and get to areas of the world quickly, stealthily, and we need to make sure that we're there preventing that. It's all part of the wider defence strategy that we have, and we need to make sure that we're able and robust on every front.
Natalie.
Well, I think Danny might have been listening to Ali Chowns.
I'm sure he was.
I'm sure he absolutely was. The Green MP, he was speaking in the House this afternoon, particularly focusing on the fact there is also spending on new nuclear weapons in here. And those, of course, are the unusable weapons.
But they're only unusable if you keep them up to date, if you see my logic. Well, no, then they don't serve as a deterrent unless they're kept up to date.
The question is whether they serve as a deterrent at all is a whole other question. The majority of the world's countries, 123 countries, back a global ban on nuclear weapons. If Britain wants to be truly influential in the world, Britain should be joining that global ban to get rid of these hideous weapons of mass destruction, which cannot be used. But to pick up the broader point, and I do want to pick up Jim's point about AUKUS, AUKUS, which is the submarine deal that you were talking about, which is something I happen to know quite a bit about. Australia has twice before been going to get nuclear-propelled submarines, and Australia has eventually dropped out. And America doesn't actually have the capacity to produce the submarines that it's supposed to be going to supply. It's a whole fictional deal, the whole AUKUS arrangement. And it really picks up the point we were talking before about being driven by companies that want to make lots of money, that want to hold out this banner that suits companies rather than actually suiting sensible deals for defence.
Ella?
I don't have a particular view on the submarines. They sound like a fine idea, but the part of the question about whether or not we should just have the equipment for fighting, I mean, it comes back to, I'm sounding boring now, but it comes back to my point that the way in which we think about war, your average person on the street thinks about war, is not in terms of the deterrence. It's about whether or not we have the people to wage the wars and the equipment for those people, whether it's the housing for them to live in or the weapons that they're going to carry on their back. And that's the conversation that is being avoided by the government.
But I think there's something more behind that, which is, this is the Strategic Defence Review. It's not a security review. And the question is, what will actually keep us safe? And at the same time as we're doing this, we're seeing reports in the Financial Times saying there's going to be a 20% cut in the spending review in the Foreign Office. Now, diplomacy is an important part of preventing a war happening. We've seen the aid budgets absolutely slashed, falling apart. an insecure world is bad for all of us, threatens all of our security. And also, of course, we've got the problem of corruption with the City of London down the road. This is also a security issue, that so many countries around the world, so much of their funds that they might spend on education or health is actually stolen and goes into wealthy properties in London or sits in the British Overseas Territories in bank accounts.
Well, that's one view of history. OK, thank you very much indeed. We'll move on in just a moment. It's 8:33. News headlines on LBC with Daryl Jackson.
One of the architects of the Strategic Defence Review has exclusively told LBC the UK is at a hinge moment in its attitude to defence. Lord George Robertson claims the UK is probably not ready to fight a war today and warned we're facing an enemy that is working against us all the time. Police in Colorado say a man's been charged with a hate crime after an incident at a pro-Israel rally. People were targeted with petrol bombs and a makeshift flamethrower. Fresh searches are going to be carried out by police in Portugal investigating the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. It'll focus on the area of the holiday resort where she was last seen in 2007. LBC weather: heavy rain and gusty winds pushing east across much of the UK tonight. Scattered showers to follow, but staying dry for the southeast, a low of 6 degrees.
LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
8:35. Jim Murphy, Harriet Cross, Natalie Bennett and Ella Whelan answering your questions. Here's one from Mick. Do you agree with me that Reform is right to take down virtue signalling flags all across the country and put up Union flags instead? Now, there's a bit of background to this. Reform UK councils have taken down pride flags, but also Ukrainian flags as part of this new measure. My local council sorry, I've got hiccups. Not very good for a radio presenter. My local council in Kent, the first thing Reform did when they took over was take down the Ukrainian flag in the council chamber, which I thought...
Put the Russian one up instead?
They didn't put the Russian one up.
That's a work in progress then.
I'm sure it isn't. Ella?
Well, the thing about the flag wars... for me, the reason why it's boring is because both sides are very, very similar. I mean, the Ukrainian flag, I think a lot of people flew as genuine signs of solidarity. It's a little bit different. It was, something kind of authentic, and there's lots of people around where I live that still have them kind of tattered, waving from their back gardens. It was a thing that happened, and it was nice. The thing about the sort of the pride flag stuff is that while some of it might be authentic, a lot of it from a sort of institutional point of view, councils that do it and government buildings that fly it and NHS lanyards and blah, 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 a lot of people felt that it was imposed. It's the kind of that it's virtue signaling in that way, which is you're not a good person unless you want to fly this flag. So there's nothing kind of voluntary or authentic or honest about it, or very little. And so in that way, I can understand why Reform might want to tear it down. But the instituting of the Union Jack is a sort of similar thing for me, which is that you can't force feed a fake kind of patriotism to people to go. to be a broken record and go back to our previous conversation, because actually lots of the issues of politics at the moment circle back to this. You can't manufacture a sense of national pride in people by waving a flag. I mean, Keir Starmer actually did something similar. You know, the Labour Party spent years denigrating people who flew flags. Emily Thornberry tweeting nasty stuff about people, and Shami Chakrabarti bemoaning being left in rooms with Essex Man. And then suddenly, you know, Starmer says he's going to...
I take that personally. She's been left in a room with me once and I'm from Essex, so obviously I've caused this.
And now, and then Starmer suddenly finds his love for the flag and says, "Oh, you know, we're going to embrace this," and it's all a bit sort of paternalistic and patronising. And anyway, the flag wars are a sign of how empty our sense of identity, or our discussion about British identity, is. It's certainly not sort of pride flags that capture what it means to be in this country. I don't really think it's the Union Jack either, because that's a bit hollow. I mean, from an Irish background, I don't like it for obvious reasons, but there's... You know, I think the problem with Reform at the moment is that while they've got a fair amount of public support and some interesting things are happening, they're as much relying on this sort of identity politics trap as the people that they're criticising.
OK. Harriet?
Yes. I've got no problem at all with the Union Jack being flown over government or other similar buildings. I think that's correct. We are here serving the Crown, and that is the flag of the country. I would comment on the Reform's policy in that very quickly after they put out this big performative tweet that they were going to only have their Union Jacks, or I think it was St George's flag as well. But then there was a lot of people saying, what about our county flags? And suddenly they changed their policy and oh yes, but we will also include the county flag. So like when you're going to make these policies which are literally there just for a headline, you sort of have to get that headline right, and they're just doing this over and over again. It's just another little... It comes across as a gimmick when instantly it changes, and it's just there in order to sort of make a headline, make a story. Similar, I don't love sort of, as I was calling it, the flag war, flag games. I think sort of in Scotland we have probably a slightly different, again, relationship with flags, because so often, and Jim, you'll know this as well from campaigning, you walk up to a house and there's a saltire in the garden, and instantly that's almost meant to tell you we're SNP supporters, we're nationalist supporters. No, wait, that's our flag too. Like, that's a Scottish flag. Whether you're unionist or nationalist, that's a Scottish flag. So I do think flags are used, I don't want to say aggressively, that's the wrong word, but to show sort of ownership or intent, or to differ each other from sort of other people within the same society, but just used to sort of put your flag on the ground somewhere, and almost to try and separate sort of us and you, them and us. And I don't love it overall as a way to sort of prove a point. I think you can prove your nationality, what you're proud of, what you want to celebrate in different ways, other than just sort of flying it and hoping that sort of either attracts or repels other people.
Jim?
Well, I've got a flag on my lapel of my jacket. Maybe I'm a little bit contrary or a little unfashionable, but I only started wearing this Ukraine pin badge when I started to see almost no one else was wearing it. As a sort of, this thing's still going on, and okay, I might be wearing a suit, but this is still happening. I think from memory, I know we don't talk about him much anymore, but Tony Blair, remember him? I think it was his conference speech of 1996. For younger listeners, Tony Blair was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And he said, there's no point, having an attack, I think it was at Major, he said, don't lecture me on about the fabric of our flag when the fabric of our nation is in such a bad state. So I think if Reform are as exercised about the fabric of our nation as they are about the fabric flying above the top of a flagpole outside a council HQ, then I think good on them. But so far, it seems to be largely performative around which flag can fly. And at some point, they'll run out of gimmicks. And when they run out of gimmicks, they'll have to start trying to improve the fabric of the communities, not just to be the fabric of the flag.
Natalie?
I think you're making a really good point there, Jim. I was actually on, if I'm allowed to mention, the BBC a couple of weeks ago with, and they were
this morning as well. From what
I was on this morning as well, but that was sorry about that, Iain. But
actually, I was too as well, so I can't really say anything.
But you know, that question about being performative, and the question was, Andrea Jenkin, who's now the mayor of an area that has a very large renewables industry, lots of small independent businesses doing things like running boats that go out to the wind turbines. What are they performatively going to do about that? Because, they're supposed to be anti-renewables, but if a significant part of your local economy when you're the mayor is renewables, small independent businesses, jobs, everyone relying on them, what are you going to do then? And I don't think we haven't really had an answer from that, and I think the small business people will be very worried about that. So it is a performative thing, but I suppose the other concern I have is we have seen the two largest political parties so often chasing after reform that I'm worried we might see another outbreak of those flag wars where every government minister or shadow minister tries to have a bigger flag behind them and a bigger flag and a bigger flag, and then they need a bigger room because they need a bigger flag. And please, let's not go there.
Yeah.
Well,
Do Green Party leaders not bother with flags at all?
Well, I think, we might stand in front of a tree. That would be nice.
Maybe we're sort of missing the point, though, in that it's not, maybe I was misleading what I answered, is that this has got something to do with the sort of the tyranny of the pride flag, which is a real thing that I think people have felt, and not just the pride flag, but the whole kind of, all the scandals that have happened around Stonewall's involvement in institutions, people being forced to put their pronouns in their email signature, blah, 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 but things that on a daily basis really irk people. And the kind of toxic nature of the gender wars, and that conversation is ongoing despite the Supreme Court ruling. And so, I mean, we've just all sort of had a pop of reformer being a bit silly at Pride Wars, but actually maybe they are, this is perhaps a sign that they are more in touch with what average people are sort of getting ticked off about over their kitchen table than other political parties, because this is an issue for people that are, if you're working some clerk job somewhere and you're being forced to do something that you don't want to, or you're being put through some kind of training, or you're a civil servant who doesn't want to go and wear the lanyard, blah, blah, blah. It's going to annoy you. And I think Reform's probably smarter than most of the other parties in getting that that's a thing that actually matters for people.
But sometimes politics is about leadership, isn't it? Not just following public opinion.
Well, yeah, but it's also about being able to enact what you think is important to people. And, part of the thing that has, if you want to talk about undemocratic things, the nature in which so much of our daily life has been changed around the gender wars, whether it's, policies in the NHS or laws around what kind of prisons people go to, or even actually what you can say to one another, and police knocking on your door because you've written something on Twitter or liked a post. This is a big issue for people.
Okay, right, we'll move on to some more questions and our fun question at the end of the programme, which you always look forward to, I know. It's 8:45 on LBC.
This is LBC.
£100 and over.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
I'll go with that.
Jim Murphy, Harriet Cross, Natalie Bennett and Ella Whelan taking your calls and questions. Chris is in Stubbington. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Ian. What do the panel make of Attorney General Lord Hermer's clumsy remarks on pulling Britain out of the international courts and Nazi Germany?
Right, on Thursday, Richard Hermer, the Attorney General, Lord Hermer, compared current politicians who want this country to abandon what he called the constraints of international law in favour of raw power to legal theorists in 1920s Germany who made similar arguments prior to the rise of the Nazis. I have to say, I've never met Lord Hermer. He seems to be quite a controversial character, Jim. Is he someone familiar to you?
I've known him for 35 years.
Okay, very familiar.
So I've bumped into him a few times. But 35 years. I think a rule of politics, constitutional politics, is that if you're talking about Hitler, you're probably in the wrong place. And sometimes people who aren't elected, sorry, Natalie, but you've been elected, of course, before. But those who are unelected sometimes don't have that instinctive sense of the unwritten rules of politics. And it was clumsy. He apologised. And I just think any aspiring politicians listening, just remember, talking about the Nazis and Hitler doesn't get you anywhere, shouldn't get you anywhere, because there is no parallel in global history with the tyranny of the Nazis, and we shouldn't pretend that something relatively trivial in comparison is.
Stalin, Mao.
Yeah, in terms of the Holocaust, I'm talking about, of course, in terms of the quantum of people, Stalin and others, actually, in earlier history. But don't talk about Hitler, don't talk about the Nazis to make a constitutional point. I don't think you add anything, and you detract from your argument rather than strengthening it.
Harriet?
I don't think the remarks were clumsy at all. I think they were calculated. He knew exactly what he was saying. He is high up in the world of law. They are very used to picking their words carefully. He said it to get a reaction. He did get a reaction, but it was not the reaction he wanted, which is why he then backtracked and called his remarks clumsy. I think we're giving him a huge amount of credit by accepting the fact that they're clumsy, and we shouldn't give any more airtime to the words that he said.
You're not being cynical by any chance?
I'm not being cynical. I think it was, as Jim said, any linking now to things happening today, back to what happened in Nazi Germany, pre or prior to Hitler's time there, is always said in order to have some sort of reaction come about that they want people to think, oh my goodness, people today are so bad, look at what they're doing now, we want to make sure we move away from this as quickly as possible, we can't possibly have that. We are nowhere near that. No one in this country is anywhere near the remarks or the workings of what was happening in Nazi Germany pre or prior to the war breaking out. The fact that Lord Hermer thought he was able to say that and stood by them until the fact that he had enough public reaction but he was forced to retract them and just call his words clumsy shows exactly that he will say whatever he needs to get out of a hole, but he got into that hole in the first place because he wanted to.
Natalie?
I think I very much agree with Jim that this is an unelected person making clumsy remarks without understanding the political implications. This is an argument against an unelected House of Lords. We have a House of Lords that's now, we're about to get rid of the hereditaries, which of course is totally indefensible.
Is that definitely happening?
Well, yes, the bill is going to go through. Yeah. I mean, there's been a huge amount of delay in our House and a lot of angry grumbling, but it was in the manifesto, it will go through. Then we're going to have an even more appointed House through 18th century style patronage. That's a terrible way to run the country, coming back to Ella's point about democracy. You tell people in other countries that we have an unelected House of Lords and people are appointed to that because they're mates with the Prime Minister. And
which Prime Minister were you mates with?
Well, I wasn't. I was democratically elected by the Green Party because Theresa May decided to offer the Green Party a seat. Why did Theresa May do that? Well, there had been a Lord Speaker's Commission which had said that the Greens were underrepresented in the House and there should be more Greens. So I don't defend the unelected House of Lords. I came in saying I want to abolish my own job as soon as possible. That's where I come from. But it doesn't work. This is not a system for the 21st century, having unelected politicians, unelected people in senior cabinet posts.
OK. Ella?
Well, he might be used. I mean, I agree on the point about Hitler. I mean, it's pretty commonplace now, though, whether it's Gary Lineker or anyone else, everybody's always comparing us to whoever they disagree with to Nazis, and it's become a very cheap thing, and it's very offensive to Jewish people, and particularly
Lord
people
Hermer is Jewish.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can still be offensive to people that you're from, but I mean, Jim's making a serious point about the denigration of the specificness of the Holocaust and what Hitler was engaged in. But, to come to the point about international law, I mean, there are lots of people who might not use the H word, but who genuinely think that if we leave the ECHR, all hell will descend and this country will become a terrible, terrible, oppressive place to live in. And that's the real, never mind what he says about Hitler, that's the real...
Funny, I thought Brexit had already brought that about.
Yeah, well,
hey-ho.
Don't bring me there.
No, me neither. Matthew says, are we in danger of allowing blasphemy laws via the back door? Now, Hamit Koskun has been found guilty of a religiously aggravated public order offence after burning a copy of the Quran and shouting offensive statements about Islam while stood outside the Turkish consulate in London. Harriet, let's start with you.
There is real concern that we're seeing, say, a blasphemy law by the back door being the Public Order Act. We must remember that in this country we have freedom of religion, we have freedom to have no religion, we have freedom of speech, but there isn't a freedom not to be offended. And while all those things are in place, we cannot see more and more use of the Public Order Act in order to go down the route of preventing people, of any faith, any religion or none, having their say and doing whatever they choose to do. Yes, you don't have the right to not to be offended. Should we go around trying to offend people? No, ideally not. But you do not have the right not to be offended. We don't, we shouldn't be going around arresting people, charging people, fining people, just effectively for offending someone, whether that's to do with religion or not, because as I say, we have freedom of religion or freedom to non-religion in this country.
Natalie.
Well, I think it's worth looking at the fact that we're talking about someone here who got a £240 fine with a £96 charge, and that's something that people may not have realised that's what happened here. I wasn't sitting in the courtroom. I don't know the exact detail of what was said. Most of the reports actually don't say that, I assume, because it contains some pretty awful language, and that's why the reports don't say it. So I think we've got a balance here of how much were those remarks that are likely to incite people to, inciting to violence is a very serious problem. So I think it's a balance here, and without actually having been in the detail of the courtroom, it's very hard to know exactly where you're at and where this should be and exactly what happened in this case. And I think it's been somewhat simplified in terms of the way it's been discussed in a lot of places.
But it is simple. There is a blasphemy. This is blasphemy law. A man burnt a Quran. He was then assaulted by two people. One who had a knife, and the other was kicking him when he was down on the ground. And he has been. I mean, when you read some of the stuff that the judge says, it's as he's not a victim at all of any assault or anything. Never mind the fact that he almost got his head kicked in for doing this, for doing a protest, which was and he's said in his own words, I've got nothing. It's not that I have anything against Muslims. It's Islam that I have. He's himself claimed a victim of persecution. His issues with Turkey, and you might say that £240 fine is paltry. Maybe it is to you. It's not to a lot of people. But it's the principle. It's the principle that we are meant to be a country that has freedom of religion and tolerance and freedom of speech. That's what we're supposed to have, but we evidently don't. And this is, at the same time that someone is fine. And by the way, I don't think it's a great idea to burn a Quran. I don't think it's a great idea to burn any book. There are other ways to do it, but you should be free and able to do that. And this happens. And at the same time, let's remember that there is still a teacher in hiding from Batley Grammar for giving a religion lesson to his students, discussing the Prophet Muhammad with a picture, discussing with a cartoon. Those two things are happening at the same time. We're prosecuting someone for burning a Quran, and at the same time, barely anything is being done about the fact that a teacher has been threatened with beheading and is in hiding. So that's the country we live in.
Jim?
I think they've always been limitations on pure freedom of speech in this country, and there are in other democracies as well. I mean, in the US, and I don't always like talking about the US, but even where free speech is enshrined in their constitution, the example, you're not allowed to shout fire in a theatre. there are limitations on freedom of speech. Now, I don't know the detail of this case. I haven't followed it. I think I remember the video of the person being assaulted afterwards. What I don't know is whether he was given a £240 fine for burning the Quran or for shouting something while doing it.
Both.
Well, £120 each. I don't know enough about the case, but generally speaking,
But what would the difference be?
One could incite racial violence. It could incite racial hatred by shouting something. I don't think burning a Quran in and of itself incites racial violence or racial hatred. But if you shouted something while burning it, it's conceivable you could. And I don't want to live in a country where shouting anything against any minority group, or any group actually, that incites violence against them is tolerated.
We have to differentiate, don't we, between minority groups and religions. And the fact is, I mean, let's call a spade. You have to be far more sensitive talking about the Prophet Muhammad and the Quran than you do about Jesus and the Bible. At
the moment, yes, but remember, when The Life of Brian was in the 1970s, when The Life of Brian, the Monty Python film, it wouldn't have felt like that then. And that was obviously the majority population at the time. That's the moment in which we live in now. Yes, that's the case. But as our society continues to evolve, that hasn't been the case. But I get the point. There's a big conversation because Islam's involved. The Quran has been burnt, and it enables a sort of, often a clickbait-driven coverage of some of this stuff. I don't know enough about the case.
We are going to be talking about this for the next hour, but not in a clickbaity way.
I feel sorry for your listeners.
Well, why? I think it's a really important point.
But unless you start with the facts,
I've got the facts, and I shall be delivering them
I'm looking
to my listeners. If you wish to stay for the hour, Jim,
it's not a trivial point at all. The question of whether or not it's and you know what actually I think what the guy thinks about Islam or anything like that is irrelevant. The question is whether or not you have free speech in this country, and you've said we never have. That's not. But that's not. That's not. Yeah, we might never have. We haven't. Never have.
We don't, and we shouldn't.
We're in danger of not having enough time.
I don't think you should be allowed to incite racial violence against another person.
There's a difference between whether what incitement means.
But should you be allowed to incite racial violence against another citizen of this country?
There's a difference between incitement
and words. I'm only asking for a yes or no, because you're coming across as a free speech absolutist, and I'm just trying to get to the point. I am a free speech
absolutist.
So therefore, it's fine to incite. Therefore, it's fine to incite violence.
We're going to run out of time for our final question, and I'm sure you wouldn't want to do that, Jim. Yeah. Right, it's from Alistair in Worcester. A group of scientists have been challenged to use AI to decode whale noises so we can understand what they're saying. Which animal would you most like to have a chat with, and what about? Natalie.
Oh, I'm going, really thank you for this question, Alistair, because I absolutely love it, because I want to have a chat with a cuttlefish, because we've actually recently started to uncover just how intelligent cephalopods, octopuses, there's been some films about this.
That's two new words I've learned tonight.
and there's just been a study done on cuttlefish that they can take delayed gratification. So they'll say, here's one treat, or here's a better treat, but you can only get the better treat if you don't take the other one first. And this is something they do with children sort of 3-4 years old. It shows the development of intelligence. And cuttlefish will actually wait for the better treat. They understand this test.
Is this something you've learned from the House of Lords?
This is something
in which case we shouldn't be abolishing it.
This is actually from my next book, I'm afraid to tell you, Ian, yes. We've thought that you have to have a big brain that looks like ours to be intelligent. We are slowly starting in the 21st century to understand that there's other forms of intelligence. This is emerging in very different species in different ways.
Ella?
It wouldn't be a chat, but I'd like to accost the cats that populate Hackney. It's the bane of my life that so many people over lockdown got ridiculous pets, whether it's cats or dogs, and they keep me up every night, and I hate them. So I'd like to stop squirting my squirt gun with them and instead, have a real free speech absolutist with some of the cats.
My producer is probably going to insist that we never invite you on the programme again.
I know, I've got memories of the cow thing is coming back up to me the last time.
Oh, Harriet.
Mine's very specific. I'd like to have a chat with my black Labrador, Maya. There's a few very specific things I need to ask her why she does. A lot of them revolve around eating things she definitely shouldn't, how to make her come back when she runs away, and why sometimes she stops for absolutely no reason and then stalks us about 20 metres behind when we're walking along and stops when we look around.
Because you're a bad parent.
Well, I might be, but I want to know how I can improve. So that's why I need to speak to her.
Jim?
Well, Alistair asked the question, so I'll give you a Scottish answer that Harriet and I were chatting about. Just to confuse everyone in England, I'd like to get to know the famous Scottish animal known as the haggis.
Animal?
Yes.
Fact.
Shh, don't tell anyone in England it's not real.
It's not an animal.
Iain.
Are you trying to tell me that people go into Tesco and all over England and don't realise that haggis isn't an animal?
You'll be saying that same about Nettie next.
Am I living in a parallel universe tonight? I think we'll finish there. Thank you all very much, apart from the last bit. On the programme tomorrow, we have the journalist Melissa Benn, who's the daughter of Tony, Labour MP Tom Hayes, one of Harriet's colleagues from the Conservatives who doesn't have a name at the moment.
They'll be fabulous.
And the Daily Telegraph's Poppy Coburn. They'll be with us tomorrow here on the programme. Coming up in the next hour, as we have just told you, a man has been found guilty of an offence after burning a Quran outside the Turkish consulate in London in a case that has sparked a debate over the freedom of expression. Hamit Koskun was accused of shouting, I can't say it, well, it begins with F and then Islam, and Islam is the religion of terrorism, as he held up a burning copy of the holy Islamic text in Knightsbridge in February. Today, he was found guilty of a religiously aggravated public order offence. Is this introducing a new law of blasphemy by the back door? And if that's a bad thing, why? 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, the Defence Secretary is pledging to make the British Army 10 times more lethal as he announced plans to improve the military. John Healey's accepted recommendations in the Strategic Defence Review, including increasing Army personnel and investing more in weapons.
Our adversaries are working more in alliance with one another, while technology is changing the way war is